Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and today I thought we could dive into the topic of perhaps stretch or maybe reinvention, the idea about evolving, about our identities, our roles, our responsibilities, and what does it look like when we start to imagine other possibilities. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining me today. So, I've had several conversations in the last few weeks with people who are talking about essentially reinvention, imagining how they do their lives in a different way, or perhaps even exploring what other career paths could look like, or other aspects of their business, even this idea about whether or not they still want to live in certain communities. So I thought we could share this time together to talk about this identity piece and why perhaps it creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty. And why is it if we're in the middle of these massive seasons of uncertainty, or I guess you could say stressors or unpredictable nature of things, why is it the time that people all of a sudden start reimagining what's possible? And I think there's a really good reason for that. Now, we talked a wee while ago about change and how change is something that invokes a big feeling, a big reaction. And for some people, it's excitement. They look forward to new opportunities, they look forward to what's possible. Now, the majority of the people, however, find change very unsettling. And we talked about it then, and we'll talk about it just briefly now, is because we as humans crave routine and predictability. Like we will stay in chaotic situations because the chaos is familiar versus the fear of the unknown. The fact that like we would put up with even just like really terrible relationships because it's a known variable versus the fear of the unknown. And I think on some level, there's this idea that it could get worse, or not knowing is worse than essentially the devil you know. So again, we crave predictability. We crave familiar. We crave patterns. And this is like deep in our evolution. Being able to have a sense of your environment, of the players in your environment, is really good for our survival, even if some of those situations are not optimal. So again, it's keeping us perhaps alive, but it isn't necessarily allowing us to live up to our full potential of what's possible when we stretch, when we co-create big, bright futures beyond some of the limitations, especially those limiting beliefs that we put upon ourselves. So again, recently somebody asked me, Robyne, you left a very stable, secure university post to go out as an entrepreneur. And, that must have been so scary. Yeah, for sure. There was part of it that was really scary. I didn't know what the future was going to look like. However, once I stepped outside of that familiar, first and foremost, I do want to acknowledge that I have enormous amounts of privilege given that my husband has a full-time permanent job and benefits and things like that. So yes, it was brave and I had some pretty solid guardrails in place. Also, I had a bunch of education that I knew if this didn't work, I could fall back on that. So there were other variables that contributed to me feeling safe and secure enough to take that big bold step into the unknown. That being said, yeah, I was betting on myself. And I've shared the story before about Hunter asking me to bet on myself because he missed his mom. He wanted his mom around. And I was giving so much to this institution. And again, I've also said before, an institution, an organization, and a company, it is greater than just one person. And I loved my time at the university in certain seasons and for certain reasons. However, there were a few players that really actually, and I looking back in hindsight, I'm actually kind of glad it unfolded the way it did because it pushed me probably in a direction that if everything was just smooth and copacetic, I might not have even entertained taking a big, bold step into my future. Okay, what does that all mean? I appreciate, yeah, it's scary. Yes, there are going to be pieces if we have in place that might make us feel a wee bit more secure. And sometimes these big interruptions, like a difficult boss or world events or unpredictability, what it does is it actually kind of pushes us towards that edge or that threshold of perhaps evaluating, is this how I want to spend my day? Is this how I want to live my life? Is this what my story is going to look like in this particular chapter? Now, there's this amazing concept that we talk about when it comes to reinvention or seeing yourself differently or taking those risks. And the idea is inspired by the notion of the second summit. So many of us, we have been told that, if we do everything right, we get the good job and, we go to school and we're nice and do all the things, we should be able to, go up a summit, be able to get to the mountaintop. And it's like, boom, there you go. And you know what? That works for about 33% of the population. The other 33% of the population, the outliers, are never going to get off the ground. Okay. And then there's going to be 33% of the people who get to the top, and all of a sudden, a third of them say, what else? What's next? And that doesn't mean we are broken. It doesn't mean we're not satisfied or, why, I've even remember somebody saying to me when I wanted to take that second summit, why can't you just be happy with what you have? Like, why do you always have to have more or want more? And what an interesting question. Why can't you be satisfied with what you have? Well, I think the secret for me is I was deeply satisfied with what I had already achieved and what I had and what my world looked like. And when I looked at, am I living up to my potential? I realized that there was growth. There was still room to go. There was that second summit. So, yeah, I was deeply satisfied. It was enough. And when I looked at it compared to, am I living up to my potential? Am I using all of my God given gifts to be of service? I couldn't answer that question. I couldn't answer that question where it's like, yes, I'll be able to do it staying here. So I knew in my heart that restlessness was the fact that that was the energy that I needed to be able to drive me into the second summit, that reinvention of seeing myself no longer as just an instructor, a professor. And again, there was nothing wrong with that. That was amazing. There was something else out there for me. I felt it. And I don't believe we hold those dreams in our hearts and that calling if we're not meant to listen to it. So I listened to those whispers and I took that second summit. And one of the things that I really leaned into was that identity piece. I found enormous amounts of security in the title of my job description, in my annual performance review, in the fact that on a piece of paper in an HR department, I had a retirement date. That brought a lot of security. But what happened in my particular case, and I can only speak of my circumstances, is that that identity piece became out of alignment with the way I wanted to be living my life. So, yes, that security piece was amazing. And that role, that identity, senior educational developer, yeah, it was giving me security, but that security was out of alignment with how I wanted to be showing up for my family. And when you have that moment and you recognize that you've like missed a lot of childhood, you've missed years that you don't get back, time is the only thing we can't buy more of. It's the only thing we cannot get more of. All of a sudden, you realize something's got to give. So, what I noticed in my own experience was I had to let go of the title, of the job description, of the this is what I do. When we ask somebody, what do you do? Interestingly, on a social psychology front, we're doing it because we're trying to generate and garner how much respect a person deserves. Now, that is a broken, fractured concept, but that's why we ask people what they do. If someone says, oh, I'm a surgeon, we're like, wow, hard worker. This is somebody who is very skilled, probably good at math. Like we create these narratives. If someone says, oh, I'm between jobs, we have this like, oh, there's a narrative that we already create in our minds about what those roles are. We hear someone say that they're an early childhood educator. We think, wow, they must be really great with kids, right? We have all these what we call mental shortcuts when it comes to our roles in our culture. So, me walking away from a university post, I was giving up this as this a sense of esteem that I was given by just where I worked. Hello, everyone. My name's Robyne. I'm excited to tell you about the Stress Wisely Virtual Lab Experience. Now, this is a program where people are going to have the opportunity to complete a baseline, figure out where their stress levels are, what areas that they have strengths, what areas do they need more investing. Now, all of this work is based on my book, Stress Wisely, How to Be Well in an Unwell World. And I'm excited to bring research-informed practices into this community so people can get their own blueprint. Not every solution works for everyone, but when we learn how to stack and sort and how to sequence practices, habits, and tools that give people a great return on their investment, they're going to start to feel well again. This is going to prevent burnout. This is going to give people the resources and the tools to know what to do, but also how to do it. So please join me in the first ever Stress Wisely Virtual Lab. We are going to be able to get to the bottom of what it takes for each person to figure out how they can be well. Now, we call it a lab because ultimately this is all a big experiment. We need data to make data-driven decisions to know where people are going to start to do the work to feel better. So please join me for the Stress Wisely Virtual Lab. Lots of information. We saved you a seat. And if you want to radically show up for your team, this is a resource that you don't want to miss. Take good care and we'll see you there. Bye. Okay. So let's dive into that identity piece because James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits, he did a really lovely job at like sharing some really good research that other people had done when it came to identity. And there was one particular study that really stuck out, and it's in that book, and it's also in a few other different social psychology textbooks. And the study looked at a smoking cessation program. So teaching people, helping people learn how to stop smoking cigarettes. And they divided the people into two groups. Now, the first group was instructed that they were going to cut back on smoking. So they had basically like a reduced smoking schedule. So maybe the first day they would 24 cigarettes and the next day they would have 20 and then 18. And they were reducing their intake of smoking. They were trying to quit. The other group was instructed that as of this point, you are no longer a smoker. You are a non-smoker. And they did a lot of narrative work about identifying themselves as a non-smoker. And what was fascinating in that research, when they look at people who quit and then started up again, the people who were cutting back, those were the people who had the most what we call regressions, right? They are the most people that would regress back or high recidivism. And what was amazing, the people who internalized the belief that I am a non-smoker had very, very little relapses because they changed their identity. They changed how they saw themselves. So when someone, for example, would offer them a cigarette, they would say, oh, I don't smoke. I'm not a smoker. Versus the person who would say, no, I'm trying to cut back. So the identity piece is powerful. Now, it was just another little side digression. What's interesting about the identity piece is that people talked about smoking being so addictive. because lots of different reasons, but one of them is because it's a behavior people did so frequently, right? Like if you think of smoking 25 cigarettes a day, like wow, that's a lot of uptake of smoking. What I think is quite interesting, and this is why I hold space for people who share that they struggle with like looking at their cell phone or like using technology, especially at nighttime or in bed and scrolling and all of that. There's research that's showing on average in North America, we're looking or picking up our cell phone on average 262 times a day. 262 intervals, like time points in a day. So if you're ever like getting hard on yourself about like, oh man, I'm always on this phone, oh my goodness. If anything, we're saying that this is like more addictive than smoking behavior. And again, there's chemicals involved in looking at our phones. There's dopamine hitting when we put something in our cart. There's oxytocin when we see loved ones' pictures or we see text messages or even our friends sending us memes. Like there's chemicals at play there as well. So again, hold space for yourself if you're someone who identifies as really using your cell phone a lot. Wow, there's a lot of behaviors in there that we might want to explore and unpack, but you are not alone. And that is a strong reinforcement schedule that we've built for ourselves. Okay, pause, back on track. This identity piece, the invitation that I wanted to share, especially for folks who are feeling a wee bit stuck, is I want you to imagine what would be that new identity that to be able to do the thing that you want to do, you need to start leaning into, or perhaps signing off, like essentially having like a little bit like a little retirement party for that previous identity, being like, yeah, wow, I was this role, and I was this lead marketer, I was this broker, I was this real estate agent, and I'm going to bring that tenure to a close to make room for this evolution, to make room for what's next. Sometimes we have to get some of that stuff out of the way to have room for what's possible. Now, in the spirit of this idea of like stretching or leveling up, another theme that pops up when I speak to people is this idea about like essentially worthiness, right? If we were to really get to the essence of what people are talking about, it's why should I be able to live a big, bold life? Like, why should I be the one that gets to do this? My invitation for you there is we all have gifts and talents and skills, and you don't serve the world by playing small. If you hold those gifts and skills and talents and you don't share them, that doesn't mean that you are a more humble person or you're a more grateful person because you're staying small and meek. That's not what you are sent here to do. I think we're meant to share these big, bright, beautiful gifts, which means sometimes we got to put ourselves out there. Now, in that notion of putting themselves out there, I have recently embarked on a project. And let me tell you, I am feeling all of the edges of, why should you be the one doing this work? Why, all those like that narrative can get pretty noisy. I also think it's interesting that when I lean into some of that negative talk, it's a particular voice from my past and it's not mine. When I hear, if I slow down and listen enough to some of that negative, some of that, like, who do you think you are? Why should you do this big project? That's not my voice. It's somebody from my past. And as soon as I bring that to awareness and place that and hold space for it, let me tell you, I can show up to meet that voice and put it in its place, which is in the past. So, the project to share, I don't mean to, that was meant to be a cliffhanger. The project that I'm about to launch is my Stress Wisely Labs. I do a behavioral inventory every 90 days. And I just assumed this was somebody that things that a lot of people do. And when I started to talk to other people and I shared them my protocol, they were really blown away. They're like, "Wow, that's so interesting. I didn't know that's possible. I can see why that's so effective." And we got lots of this, momentum in these conversations. People got really excited and said like, "Hey, can I do that with you?" I'm like, "Of course." Now, you say a course to enough people and you're going to have a very full calendar. And I realized I don't need to do this in these one-off connections. I want a community of practice to bring people along with me into my lab because I love helping people find really efficient ways to be well. I love helping people to find their unlocks that will give them the best return on their investment of time and energy and focus. I love when we find the right solution to that persistent problem the person has. And then there's like growth, there's relief. We talk about this idea that seeing is relieving. When you know where to focus and you get really tactical and you have your unlock, all of a sudden, like that's where the magic is. That's where the weight falls off. That's where the worry ceases. That's where you walk boldly in your professional pursuits, in your personal life, when people figure out what those barriers are. So I decided I wanted to share this with people. So again, they're called my Stress Wisely labs because ultimately we call it a lab because life is one giant experiment. And it has taken me so far 45 years to figure out what works for me. And I know that there isn't one solution for everyone, but I do know the right questions and how to assess where are your roadblocks? Where are the things that if you put time, tender attention, focus, and resources towards, when that's out of your way, wow, you're unstoppable. So I'm about to launch this, and I'm so excited to welcome people into this community. I'm also excited it will finally answer the question after I do a keynote and people say, hey, I want to work with you more, Robyne, or like, hey, I want, do you do coaching? Do you do therapy? Can I sign my husband up? I have now something to say. This is what I can offer. You're welcome to join me, essentially 4 times a year. We're going to do this lab virtually, and we're going to get you the key pieces of information that you need to be able to have your breakthrough. Having said all this, it's about to launch, and I oscillate between no one is going to join me. I'm going to do party of one, which, you know what? I'm okay. I've done it by myself, but again, that's not the intention. I don't want to keep doing this by myself. I'm going to have so many people in this community to practice. I'm going to break Zoom. And it's amazing when we're taking risks, we're trying something new, that we can oscillate between the two. Super scary. This is going to be amazing. And I just want to hold space for people who are also imagining their new opportunities, the possibilities. Being nervous is part of evolution. Being excited, letting yourself be excited for your big, bright future is also part of it. So if you are also in that place of oscillating between this is scary, I'm not going to do it, and oh my gosh, you're going to change lives, you're going to break Zoom, I want that for you. And I really believe that we have to believe it's possible within ourselves, because that's going to send the energy out into the world to let people know this is happening. So a huge shout out to Janelle for a great conversation yesterday, who told me all about the golden bowl and the ripple effect of trusting what you're putting in the world. Big shout out to Natalie and Jenny and Jenna for helping me get this off the ground. And so Reinvention, it's actually pretty amazing, because what I think is scarier is staying the same. And my friends, we have the agency to live big, bold, bright days. And you deserve it. You are allowed to be so well, even in an unwell world. And again, the world doesn't benefit from you staying small. So if you needed that little invitation to take a big risk, to try something new, I'm in your corner. I'm already rooting for you. Tag me, DM me, let me know what that big, bold thing you're doing, because I am going to stand behind you and cheer you on and help spread your message too. So thanks for listening. I'll put some information about the labs in the show notes if you want to check it out. I'll always hold a spot for you. Take good care, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.